Well, we're joined by Bob and Carol Bridgestock. Now, Bob, you were a detective at the time. Carol, you also worked for the police. What was your thought today, Bob, when you first heard about the death of Peter Sutcliffe?
Good riddance. And there'll be no tears shed by me and a lot of people in West Yorkshire Day. The man terrorised the community. And it's a sad day for, those people who were attacked, who don't know if it was him that attacked them or not.
When Josephine Whittaker was murdered, you were one of the first on the scene at the time. What was your reaction when you saw what had happened to her?
I started my 30-year career in 74. In 75, as you mentioned, Wilma Kakana. I went to Ellen Ritcombe murder in Huddersfield in 78, 79. Josephine Whittaker. I was one of the first officers on that scene. Very quickly we realised it was an attack of the Ripper type. And we waited to set the scene back then. You didn't have the equipment. You had to wait for people to arrive. So phone calls had to be made, even to get a tent to secure the body. And it was an horrendous night.
Briefly, do you think something like this could ever happen again, not with modern science today?
No, the review that was done by Laurie Byford, the HMI, in 2005, I think it was, really pulled no punches and injected into the police service and forensic side a much needed energy. And nowadays, of course, we've got DNA, we have equipment on the spot, and it wouldn't survive, thankfully, this day and
Carol,
age.
for you were a young lady at the time walking the streets. What was it like? How did women feel?
Oh, I remember being dropped off at my door by bus drivers. They literally would stop at your door because obviously they knew how frightened we were. I've never run so fast from the bus to home. And even now, it's left me with that feeling of, I hate walking out in the dark on my own, and if I hear footsteps behind me, I really panic. And that's his legacy, there's no doubt.
John Cundy, you were the BBC's crime correspondent at the time. Good to see you, by the way, John. It must have been the biggest story you ever worked on.
Well, it certainly wasn't, Phil, because we've had so many, I was news editor at Radio Leeds, we've had so many false alarms, and finally, that Sunday night, we realised, for real, that they'd got this man, this beast. All we knew at the time, we were told he was a 34-year-old lorry driver from Bradford. It wasn't until the following day, he was named. But it was a night of drama and excitement for all those who'd followed the case and realised it had finally come to an end.
Briefly, what would be your abiding memory of your time working on that story, do you think?
Well, a lot of sadness. I got to know people like Richard McCann very well. I respected him. But yeah, it was probably the most dramatic story I ever covered in 44 years of journalism.
And your emotions this morning when you woke up to the news?
Ambivalent, really, because I prepared myself knowing the reports that Sutcliffe was very ill, and it didn't surprise me that he was riddled with all sorts of problems, and it didn't surprise me he'd finally gone. But as Bob was saying, good riddance to a man who'd kept everybody
John, thank you for joining us. Bob, Carol, thank you for coming on tonight as well. Well, retrieving of Peter Sutcliffe's victims had a lasting impact, not just on their relatives, but also on ordinary women in Yorkshire too, who were too scared to simply walk the streets, as we've heard there from Carol. They were encouraged to modify their behaviour to protect themselves. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Emma Glasby, has been taking a look at some of the judgmental attitudes which could have hampered the investigation.
For more than 5 years, women in Yorkshire were told they were at risk.
Any woman, anywhere, is a potential target.
The warnings were everywhere, the awful atrocities so close to home.
Pretty awful. Scared. We're very scared, and we're not going to go out again on our own.
Really?
It just worries me sick, really. I will never go out on my own at night. We're all the same. It's terrible.
13 women were murdered. Others survived attacks, but were left devastated.
My attack did shape my life, within a matter of 5 minutes. One side of that time scale, I was a happy-go-lucky, young, innocent art student, and after that I became sarcastic and cynical, and I lost trust, and sometimes I lost empathy because it was overshadowed by anger, and that did impact on my relationships.
For women in Yorkshire, it was terrifying, but also restricting, with many feeling they could no longer live freely.
Men off the streets! Men off the streets!
Reclaim the Night protests began as people marched in anger at women being told not to go out after dark. The protests spread, the movement has continued today. Emma grew up in Headingley, not far from where Jacqueline Hill was killed. She's made a plaque to mark the 40th anniversary of Jacqueline's murder next week and talked to me about being at school at the time.
Even then I remember girls being angry and having that kind of it's not fair feeling. It's not our fault. Why are we having our lives restricted like this?
Some of the language and the tone used by senior West Yorkshire police officers at the time has also caused distress. Today, the force said sorry, an apology many had been calling for.
I do remember when a victim was called innocent, and I did even think back then that does that mean that all the other women had brought it on themselves because of the way that they've chosen to live their lives? We should all be treated with equal respect, and victim shaming is of the past. I'm very pleased that West Yorkshire Police have issued their apology. When you're speaking to victims and their families, it's really important that you're treated with respect.
The world has changed over the decades, but many women who lived through that time won't forget the fear and the warnings that it wasn't safe to lead their normal lives. Emma Glasby, BBC Look North.
Well, I'm joined now by Ruth Bundy, civil rights lawyer who campaigned for compensation for victims of the Yorkshire Ripper. Ruth, what was it like for women when all this was going on back in the late 70s, early 80s?
Well, we were angry. We were angry at two things. One, the way in which murders of people who had been involved in prostitution were seen as salacious and almost entertainment, and it was only when somebody who was, quote, innocent and respectable that people really sat up and became concerned about this chain of deadly things. We were also angry at having to be told we should stay in, hence the Reclaim the Night marches and other things that went on at that time. We were sensible, we were protective of each other. From that time on, I remember taking people home in my car and always waiting until they'd walked up the path, got into their house, turned the light on and shut the door. And that's something that has remained with me until this day.
What do you make of the Chief Constable's apology today? Because in some way there was an assertion that some of the women were demeaned simply because they were working in the sex trade. Do you think that's the right thing for him to do today?
Well, it's been a long time coming. I'm glad it's come at last. But of course there were dreadful things said, and even in Sutcliffe's court case, it was said that sadly there were non-prostitutes killed as well as other women.
And briefly, your emotion, 10 seconds today when you heard the news?
Well, it's been a long time coming. It's come. Goodbye.
Ruth, thanks for talking to us tonight. So for 45 years, the shadow of the Yorkshire Ripper has loomed large over this county. Tonight, Amanda, it may be at least a little bit more faded.
Yes, Phil, thank you.